This is the big long list of immorality throughout the Bible. I'm not going to actually go through with the scriptures. I'm just going to name off the titles of the scriptures. You can go look them up yourself. For one, because I don't have time, and two, I don't feel like it. Let's start with child abuse. Genesis chapter 22, Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 18 through 21, and chapter 23, verse 2. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 10, chapter 20, verse 30, chapter 22, verse 15, chapter 23, verses 13 through 14, Psalm chapter 137, verse 9, child molestation, Numbers chapter 31, verses 17 through 18, abortion, Amos chapter 1, verse 13, 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 16, Hosea chapter 9, verse 11 through 16, and chapter 13, verse 16, Numbers chapter 5, verse 5 through 31, pillaging, Genesis chapter 34, verses 13 through 29, Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 13 through 14, Numbers chapter 31, verses 7 through 12, murder, Exodus chapter 2, verse 12, Judges chapter 9, verse 5, chapter 11, verses 29 through 39, chapter 14, verse 19, 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 15, 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 24 through 25, and 29 through 34 and 46, and chapter 9 verse 27, chapter 10 verse 7, 2 Chronicles chapter 21 verse 4, and Ezekiel chapter 20 verse 26. Cannibalism, Leviticus, there's somewhere in that one, I forgot to write down the actual chapter verse. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 53, Isaiah chapter 49 verse 76, Jeremiah chapter 19 verse 9, Ezekiel chapter 5 verses 8 through 10, 2 Kings chapter 6 verse 29. Genocide, Genesis that's funny. Chapter 6 verses 11 through 16, and chapter 7 verse 11 through 24. Exodus chapter 17 verse 13, and chapter 32 verse 27. Numbers chapter 2 verse 3 and verse 35. Deuteronomy chapter 2 verse 33 through 34. Chapter 3 verse 6, chapter 7 verse 2, chapter 20 verse 16. Joshua chapter 8 verses 22 through 25, chapter 10 verse 27 through 40, and chapter 11 verse 8 through 23. 1 Samuel chapter 15 verse 3 and verses 7 through 8. Racism, Exodus chapter 23 verse 23 and verse 28. Numbers chapter 21 verse 35. Deuteronomy chapter 3 verse 6 and chapter 7 verse 1. Matthew chapter 15 verse 22 through verses 28. Leviticus chapter 25 verse 46. Joshua chapter 6 verse 21 through 27. Matthew chapter 11 verses 21 through 24. Sexism, Genesis chapter 38 verses 16 through 24. Judges chapter 9 verses 53 through 54. Chapter 19 verses 22 through 29. Chapter 21 verses 10 through 12. Deuteronomy chapter 21 verses 10 through 14. Chapter 22 verses 23 through 24 and 28 through 29. Chapter 25 verse 11 through 12. and Zechariah chapter 14, 1 through 2, or verses 1 through 2. I've got a huge list here. Leviticus chapter 12, verses 1 through 8, verse 14, chapter 15, 19 through 30, verses 19 through 30, chapter 18, verse 19, chapter 19, verse 20, chapter 21, verse 9, chapter 20, I believe that's 7 through verse 3 through 7. Chapter 27, verse 3 through 7 of Leviticus. Numbers, chapter 1, verse 2. Chapter 20, verse 13 through 15. Chapter 30, verse 3 through 16. Chapter 31, verse 14 through 18. Bigotry and violence towards sexual orientations other than heterosexual. Deuteronomy, chapter 22, verse 5. Leviticus, chapter 18, verses 22 through 23, and chapter 20 through verse 13. Talking animals. Well, this isn't really immoral, but just stupid. Genesis 3, Numbers chapter 22, verses 1 through 35. Blood sacrifices. Genesis chapter 4, verse 4, and verse 31. And chapter 31, verse 54. Leviticus chapter 1, verse 9, and chapter 9, verse 18. 2 Kings 16, chapter 16, 15, or verse 15. Ezekiel chapter 39, 17. Human sacrifice. Leviticus chapter 27, verse 29. Judges chapter 11, verse 29 through 39. Numbers chapter 31, verses 31 through 40. And let's see. Animal cruelty. Joshua chapter 11, verse 6. 2 Samuel chapter 8 through 4, or through verse 4. Incest. Genesis 4. Chapter 9, verse 1. Chapter 19, verses 30 through 38. Chapter 20, verses 11 through 12. 2 Samuel chapter 13, verses 1 through 15. Numbers, slavery. Numbers chapter 31, verses 31 through 35. Leviticus chapter 25, verses 44 through 45. Exodus chapter 21, verses 2 through 7. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 1, verses 1 through 2. And abuse of the slaves and how to mark them and whatnot. Or not how to mark them, that's in Leviticus. And abuse. Exodus chapter 21, verse 7, and verses 20 through 21. Luke chapter 13, verse 47 through 48. And spousal abuse. Numbers 5, chapter 5, verses 5 through 31. And Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 13 through 21, and verses 28 through 29. And 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 17. Now let's see. And see if I can out these off real fast. To those of you who say that the New Testament and the Old Testament are separate, whatnot, Jesus lies or contradicts himself in Matthew chapter 21, verses 21 through 22. Matthew chapter 7, verse 7 through 8. Matthew chapter 18, verses 19 through 20. Mark chapter 11, verse 24 through 25. Luke chapter 11, verse